everybody. We are back. It's Brian Foley and Luis Baez. We're with Houston Criminal Defense Attorneys and Galveston Criminal Defense Attorneys, PLLC. Today we're going over DUI. A lot of people will get a DUI, or be driving while they're intoxicated, and they'll type it into Google, how do I beat a DUI? How do I find the best DUI lawyer? What is the problem with that in Texas if you're typing in who's the best DUI lawyer?
The problem with that in Texas is you might not be getting the right type of lawyer you need for your DWI case.
Right. It's DWI in Texas, DUI in a lot of other states. They even call it OWI or OUI. I don't know. Have you ever heard OUI?
I've heard OUI and OWI is the big one that I've seen.
So we call it driving while intoxicated in Texas if you're talking about somebody who's 21 or over getting pulled over because the police thought you drank so much alcohol or were on some other substance to the point that you'd lost the normal use of your mental or physical faculties. Can you explain to our viewers, though, there is a DUI in Texas? What is that?
There is a DUI in Texas. That is for someone who is under 21 and it gets issued as a citation instead of an arrest. So like a DWI, you're getting arrested, you got to go to jail, bond out, that whole process. If you are issued a DUI case, you've really been given a citation, and the standard for DUI is lower than the standard for DWI. I don't want to leave viewers with the impression that, well, if I'm 20 or under, I can get intoxicated as much as I want, and I'm just going to get a ticket. But actually, right.
No.
You can still get a DWI arrest even if you're under age 20. It's just that the proof, so to speak, that the officer has to have to issue the citation for DUI is much lower than a DWI arrest.
So, when we talk with people who have been arrested for DWI or DUI or whatever it is, whatever they call it to us, I normally don't stop and be like, hey, it's actually DWI, not DUI. We try to focus on, what's going on. And the number one question we get is, I'll ask, what's your biggest concern with this case? And they'll say, I just got to get it off my record. To explain the difficulty of that and what steps we take to try to get something off your record.
Yes. So the difficulty comes from the fact that getting something off our record involves two different processes. So the first is, what's the process with the case itself that we just got arrested for and we're going to court for? And then assuming we're able to figure something out that's going to work out in our favor with that first process, we then have to go through the hoops of the second side of it. So the first part is our criminal charge, and then the second part is opening up a civil case to file a petition or to file a proposed order for non-disclosure. And those, A, take a while, and B, our options are going to depend on what happens with the case. And what happens with the case is often dependent upon the facts of your arrest and then the attorneys that you hired. And then from there, it could be an issue of if your defense attorney thinks, or if we think when we're talking to prosecutors, they need to just flat out file a dismissal on the case because they can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But maybe the prosecutors want us to consider something called pretrial intervention. So there's a lot of different factors that go into getting to that point where we can even talk about what it looks like to get something off our record. And it's really going to depend on your case, your attorney, the court you're in. That's where the difficulty comes from.
Yeah, it is tough. Prosecutors don't like to dismiss DWIs. They want that social credit, they want the inner office perception that they're a tough prosecutor. They don't want to look like a pushover. And DWI is one of those crimes that's political, that Mothers Against Drunk Driving adds pressure to the legislature every legislative session to make penalties more difficult on DWI.
I want to say even in this most recent legislative session, they were considering changing a DWI second. If it was a DWI second and if it was 0.15 or higher, they would just automatically make that a felony. So you're right. That's one of the things that they were trying to do.
Trying to make the punishments higher, trying to make it more difficult. It used to be that DWI and murder, I believe, were the only two crimes that you couldn't get deferred adjudication probation on. And now, even if you get deferred adjudication probation on a DWI, you can still have that used as a conviction against you to enhance to a DWI second. So even though at the end of the case there's no conviction, you can still have your second offense. It's never going to be removed from your criminal history. So the only way to get a DWI really off your criminal history is to get it totally dismissed, which means you either won a trial or the facts are sufficient that the prosecutor knows even if I try to go to trial, I have no chance of winning. And then you mentioned that, the last way is the pretrial diversion, which is like that special probation that allows the case to be dismissed and truly dismissed, not just deferred adjudication. You end up with this extra conviction. So every time we start talking about this, I always think, if I was watching this and I'd never had a prior conviction, how many different topics have we already discussed? Like expunction.
Oh, right.
People don't even know what that is. Non-disclosure. We could have a whole video on just that. It's like you can't even get into a discussion with another lawyer about DWI for how many minutes we've been going? 7 minutes without covering books of topics. So with that in mind, would you ever recommend somebody represent themselves on a DWI?
I would never make that recommendation.
Would you represent? You're a DWI's lawyer, you do this every day. Would you represent yourself on a DWI?
I would not.
You hire me.
Well, we'll see.
I probably represent you for free if you got one.
Well, in that case,
Depending on how complicated it is, how nice you were to the officer. Tell people about that. When you were a prosecutor, how far did it go that people were not necessarily a pushover, but just polite to the officer?
Most of the time when someone's communicating with an officer, especially when it's something that turns into a DWI case, I want to say 95% of the time they're answering every question, even though they might not have to. They're giving information that they're not being asked of in the first place. I mean, they are very, very deferential to the point where it may make the officer a little more professional with you or courteous with you in return, but I have seen it to where that deference just makes it a harder and harder case for us to deal with when we're in court.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever give people credit for being nice to the officer and lower the offer?
Well, I would say that I would, because from my perspective, as a prosecutor, ability to be open with the officer and communicate it in a professional or respectful way, at least, to me, it was actually a sign that they weren't intoxicated. If they're able to reach over and grab their insurance or grab whatever ID cards they need, doing little things like that, communicating little things like that. If for some reason the defense attorney and I weren't talking about like a PTI, or if for some reason there wasn't some ground that I could justify to dismiss the case, someone's ability to communicate to law enforcement professionally would be something that helped them out in negotiations between me and their attorney.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on DWIs in 2025, things to look out for, things to consider?
No, nothing that's changed, at least when we're talking about it from like a legislative changes or how's the government thinking about these charges. The only thing that I would throw out is, we're wrapping up 2025 and looking at 2026 is I feel like technology is something that is just constantly adding or expanding the definition of things like operating. I wonder with certain vehicles, you've got the ability to log onto your phone, and I can maybe lower my car windows from my phone. I can get the AC going from my phone. There are even some vehicles where, let's say I'm at my house or some other property, but my car's parked down the street. I can get my car to come to where I am. And I don't know if you've seen these up in like the Woodlands and Conroe area, but in Houston and in Galveston, I've been seeing a lot of these vehicles that don't have a human person inside driving it. They're all controlled remotely. There was actually an article the other day about it's called Waymo. Like they don't have anybody driving it, a Waymo vehicle committing traffic violations, and cops just don't know who to give the ticket to. Like, what do we do in that circumstance? Anytime we talk about DWIs, I'm just thinking about how the technology changes and how the definitions stay the same. So who knows what that might look like in the future? But that's just something I've noticed here in the past.
Yeah, and they've recently begun tests in Austin for Tesla full auto drive feature where you are not involved at all. And the question there would be, if you're intoxicated and you're on full auto drive mode, are you really operating that vehicle sufficient to say, okay, you're driving while intoxicated? Well, it's not driving. The definition for what they have to prove is operating the vehicle while intoxicated. So even if you're not driving it, I could see a prosecutor saying, well, you told it where to go, you pushed the buttons, you operated it, and if you're intoxicated, we're going to convict you anyway, even if ostensibly there's no safety difference in that vehicle's actual piloting, you might say.
Right.
From if you were totally sober or not.
Right. And let's say one of those vehicles does cause a collision with another car, or it does hit somebody. From a liability perspective, who's responsible there? I'm not sure. My wife and I actually did sit in one of those in Austin over the Labor Day weekend. And we're sitting in the back. We were just going from one part of downtown to the other side of downtown. And the back does have a little screen where you can mess with the radio, you can mess with some of the settings, some of the windows. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering, what counts as operating? If something happens, who gets held responsible for that? But from a criminal perspective, it is always changing, and it's just a matter of looking at it from the constantly changing perspective.
All right. Thanks for your thoughts on that, DUI and DWI in 2025 going into 2026. Thanks. And if you enjoyed this video and our content, don't forget to like and subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and do whatever you do on TikTok because we're going to be on there soon. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.